In my never-ending search to find more and unique ways to bump up power on the old catfish, I came across a company that makes turbos for your axle, claiming to deliver 1,300 horsepower directly to your wheels, bypassing the losses you get from a traditional turbo setup. But as you might expect, turbo axle is a wild freaking idea, an engineer's fever dream brought to life. And today, we're gonna dive into the brain of one horsepower-hungry engineer and see how turbo axles came to be, how they work, and more importantly, why Job needs to put one on the Miata. Job, we're giving you more work, baby! Woo! Let's go!
Thank you to the Zebra for sponsoring today's video. Namaste. Lately, I've been spending a lot of time meditating, learning how to diffuse the stress, anxiety, and worry of being put on hold for what seems like hours when shopping for a new car insurance policy. But once I started using the nation's leading car insurance comparison site, the Zebra, that's when everything aligned. You see, there's no such thing as long wait times at the Zebra. They make the stressful task of securing coverage completely hassle-free and quick by comparing over 100 plus insurance companies side by side in minutes. So don't waste another second listening to that bossa nova hold music. Just go to thezebra.com and let their experts do all the work while you relax, like all these people. Plane, heads up! As I was saying, no matter who you are or what you drive, the Zebra saves their drivers an average of $440 a year. To find serenity in your search for coverage, start comparing quotes and see how much you could save today by going to thezebra.com/bumper. Plane!/bumper.
Back in 1962, an engineer named Gene Middlebrooks started a company called Turbonique to sell his inventions. Applying what he learned designing ballistic missiles as a defense contractor, he built and sold power-adding equipment for cars. One of those inventions was a turbo axle, but that wasn't a turbocharger for your axle. There's a difference, let me explain. Ordinarily, we use the word turbo to describe that underhood spinny boy that uses exhaust gases to power a turbine, a fan that's rotated by the exhaust flow. That turbine is attached to an impeller, it's another fan, that pushes more air into your engine. That extra air means it can burn more fuel and make more horsepower. But the word turbo is also used with lots of other mechanical devices. To an engineer like Middlebrooks, turbo means anything that makes use of a turbine. Stuff like a turboprop airplane engine, which uses a turbine to spin a propeller, or the GM Turbo Hydromatic Transmission, which uses a turbine to build hydraulic pressure. Of course, marketers, they don't always see eye to eye with us engineers, and sometimes turbo gets used when there's no turbine. That's how we end up with Porsche's Taycan Turbo, which is an EV. It couldn't use a turbo even if it had one. Porsche's marketing people say turbo just means the fastest top-of-the-line version of their cars, because apparently words mean whatever Porsche says they do. If only there were some sort of book that could help us tell what words mean. Now that we know that marketers are liars, and getting back to some engineering, what is the appeal to designing and fabricating a turbo axle? Well, it's to solve an inherent problem that all turbochargers have. That's parasitic load. Looking at a turbo on the Miata, for example, that engine has to do work to push gases through the exhaust. If you put something in the path of those gases, like a turbine, the engine has to work harder. Now, here's a good example. Have you ever been on a mission to run into the grocery store to pick up a bag of Hawaiian Sweet Maui kettle chips, and as you're walking down the aisle, an old lady comes out of nowhere and steps right in front of you? It takes more work to push old Ethel out of the way. Perfect analogy. Similarly, a mechanical supercharger connected to the engine's crank consumes some of the engine's power. The alternator, the air conditioning compressor, and power steering pump are all doing this when you drive your car too. But this means at low RPMs, a turbo or a supercharger is drawing more power than it's adding. That's parasitic load, and at low RPMs, the engine would perform better without it. It's only when the charged air reaches a high enough density is there more than enough additional power to make up for that loss. Middlebrook saw this problem and he said, there's gotta be another way. What he came up with was a supercharger that had its own power source, but he didn't nail that on its first try. He developed a battery-powered electric supercharger. We did an episode on B2B about electric superchargers, and their big problem is that the batteries to make significant horsepower are simply too heavy for them to be viable in most cases. Middlebrook's electric supercharger had the same problem as electric turbos. It just didn't add enough power to be worth it. But he wasn't ready to give up, and because of his background in missiles, he tried a different power source. Rocket fuel! Woo! And this led to the inventions that made Turbo-Nique infamous, all of which were powered by something called Thermaline. Thermaline was just a brand name for isopropyl nitrate, a rocket fuel that Turbo-Nique would send you in the mail. If you think that's dangerous, yeah, you'd be right. I can't even send, well, no, you can. You can't send poop in the mail now. But this was 1960s, a time before safety ever existed. Seatbelts weren't even mandatory in cars until 1968, and you could buy a child's toy that contained radioactive enrichable uranium-238 in case you wanted your kids to grow up to be the next X-Men. A part of what makes isopropyl nitrate dangerous is that it's a monopropellant. That means it contains everything you need for combustion, unlike gasoline. Gasoline is composed of hydrocarbons, molecules containing hydrogen and carbon, and to make combustion happen, that requires oxygen. Oxygen is over here. They're like, yeah, you need me. You need me. Gasoline in an airtight container simply can't burn. Thermaline has oxygen built into it, meaning all you need to set off a combustion is a catalyst, like a spark, pressure, or high temperature. But it also means you can't suffocate an isopropyl nitrate fire by cutting off its oxygen supply. It's already built in, won't happen. Isopropyl nitrate isn't really used anymore, partially because it releases more toxic gases than other rocket fuels, and it's highly dangerous. But Thermaline also has another problem. It doesn't contain quite enough oxygen for complete combustion of its hydrocarbons inside an engine. The unburned hydrocarbons get very hot from the combustion happening around them and can ignite when they exit through the exhaust and come into contact with air. The flame this produces is nearly invisible and it burns around 1100 degrees C. Can't even see a hot flame. So Middlebrook saw the drag strip as a place to use his invention, a liquid-driven supercharger, and it mounted on the engine in between the carburetor and intake manifold. Like a turbo, it used an impeller to increase the pressure and density of the charged air. How that impeller was driven is what made the device super special. Attached to the other end of the impeller shaft was a turbine and combustion chamber. The combustion and exhaust gases from burning isopropyl nitrate inside that would spin the turbine and the impeller up to 100,000 RPM. To make that possible, the combustion chamber had two injector ports. One was used for the fuel Thermaline and the second was used for liquid oxygen. That extra oxygen helped the isopropyl nitrate ignite for more complete, more powerful combustion. But it also meant that you had to have 3 high-pressure canisters mounted somewhere in your car. One for liquid oxygen, one for Thermaline, and one for nitrogen, which was used as a propellant to rapidly move that Thermaline from its canister into the combustion chamber. All that sounds a bit complicated, and it was, but it's hard to argue with the results. In one of the few documented tests, a liquid-driven supercharger boosted a Chevy 409 cubic inch engine from its stock 405 horsepower to 835 horsepower. One of the biggest challenges at that point was having a carburetor that could flow enough fuel to use all that extra air. The device also took up a lot of space under the hood, and that increased charge pressure put a lot of strain on the engine. So Middlebrook's next idea was to just take the engine entirely out of the equation. And for that, he designed a rocket-fueled rocket. This is the Turbo-Nique thrust engine, and it wasn't exactly subtle. It was a rocket that you strapped to the back of a vehicle, you hit the ignition switch, and you held on. It was basically something from an Acme catalog. But in one test where a thrust engine was attached to a go-kart, It ran the quarter mile in 5 seconds at 240 miles an hour, a record for rocket-powered go-karts that remains to this day. Of course it is. Who the f else would do that? So the rocket-fueled, liquid-driven supercharger took up space under the hood, it drank fuel, and it wore out your motor. The rocket-fueled thrust engine had all the sophistication and safety of something out of a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. But the Turbo-Neek turbo drag axle was the rocket-fueled sweet spot between them. The Goldilocks turbo axle, like the thrust engine, left the car's regular motor completely alone. You could drive to the drag strip in a quiet, comfortable, otherwise totally normal road car. In fact, according to the turbo axle's instructions, when the drag axle was activated, the transmission had to be in neutral, maintaining no connection between the engine and the wheels. Pretty sick. See, the turbo axle employed the same sort of fuel system with liquid oxygen, isopropyl nitrate, and nitrogen as the liquid-driven supercharger had. And it had the same sort of combustion chamber and turbine setup with one notable exception. It was a lot bigger. Because the device was attached directly to the rear axle, it didn't have to fit in an engine bay. So everything was scaled up, and because of that, that turbine generated 1,300 horsepower. Instead of using all that power to spin an impeller and push more air into the engine, the output shaft of the drag axle's turbine was connected directly to the rear differential. Rocket-fueled combustion power was sent straight to the wheels. If you let the car in drive, that means some of the power would also be sent back up to the engine, probably spinning it faster than it was ever designed to go. And that's why the car had to be left in neutral. But there were a couple problems with this setup. First was the fuel, which was tremendously dangerous and cost around 25 bucks a gallon in today's money. That paled in comparison to the cost of the turbo axle itself. 4,695 bucks in $1960, or 42 grand today. Another downside is that none of the Turbo-Neek devices had a throttle. The turbo axle's fuel flow rate was controlled by a valve that was pretty much a garden spigot underneath the car. The turbo axle was activated or deactivated by a simple on-off switch. And if your finger fell off the ignition button during a run, you can't just reignite because Thermaline would pool inside the combustion chamber and explode if a spark was reintroduced. What? But if you had money and a total lack of self-preservation, there were a few ways that made it so easy to go fast. A Volkswagen Beetle called the Black Widow used a turbo axle to complete a 9.36 second quarter mile run at 168 miles per. It had more to give, but unfortunately we'll never know how much more. On a second attempt, just 200 feet from the finish and traveling at 183 miles per hour, the Beetle decided it was an actual rocket and went airborne. The driver was somehow completely unharmed, and alongside the wrecked car appeared in Turbo-Neek advertisements. So the turbo axle was expensive, ridiculous, completely unsafe, and we didn't even have time to talk about the lawsuits between Middlebrook, his customers, and even the US government over the poor quality manufacturing of his devices. In spite of all that, I think turbo axles deserve a second chance. There's not a single documented instance, not even an anecdote, that I could find about someone being killed or seriously injured. And if you think about it, a turbine driving the axle of a car isn't inherently any more dangerous than what an internal combustion engine does. With a better fuel source, proper throttle control, modern manufacturing techniques, and a team of engineers instead of just one guy, turbo axles could likely be made safe and reasonably priced. And that's why me and Job are going into the turbo axle business. So if you want to be on the first set of turbo axles, send us your deposit. Just $555, 48 payments of that, and we'll send you one eventually.
A flag isn't just a decoration. A flag represents an idea, a community of people and the qualities for which they stand.
And if you believe in Donut's message that everyone can like cars, then what better way to show it than with a badass donut flag? Hang it in your garage, hang it in your bedroom, or watch it wave proudly on your at-home flagpole.
I'd say they're available for only $19.98, which is so much cheaper than $20.
So get your donut flag right now at donutmedia.com and let the world know that you believe that cars are for everybody.
Let me know in the comments. What do you think? You want us to design, engineer, freaking build a turbo axle and throw it on the old Miata? Let me and Job know. We need a new project. I think that could be the one. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of B2B. If you could like this video, that really helps us out. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. If you want to see more donut content, you just need more, got to get your fix, hit that join button, take you over to the Donut Underground. We got a bunch of sick videos over there that we can't post on this channel. You can hit me up in the Discord, we can chat it up. If you want to see what life is like on a day-to-day basis, follow us here on Instagram at Donut Media. Follow me on Instagram at Jeremiah Burton. Hit me up on TikTok, Silence of the Lambda. What up? I'm TikToking now. Until next week, bye for now.